Hi, welcome to Voices of Somerville. It's a program brought to you by the Office of Somerville Commissions. It's a program of the Health and Human Services Department for the City of Somerville. We like to get out and talk to the people who are providing us services in the community, learn about what's happening. And so today, I'm very happy to have my good friend, John Georges, who is from Cataldo Ambulance Services. And John is the EMS commander. And so thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here to chat with you today.
So I want to learn a little bit about Cataldo. We see Cataldo all over the place in Somerville. So tell us a little bit about what is Cataldo?
Well, Cataldo Ambulance is one of the first and long-standing ambulance companies, privately owned, family-operated to this day ambulance companies that started in 1977 by Bob and Diana Cataldo in the city of Somerville. They started off with initially 2 ambulances, and now to date, 2014, we have over 110 vehicles on the road. We cover emergency medical services and routine transports for over 13 municipalities, all the way from Newburyport down to Waltham, Massachusetts, and still to this day, we maintain our contract and affiliation with the city of Somerville. We have about 740 employees that work both in administration and field personnel, EMTs and paramedics that staff those ambulances on a 24-hour, 7 days a week basis.
It's an amazing program, and we see the service everywhere. And so tell us a little bit about, like, you know, who are the kind of people? We have a lot of languages there and a lot of people.
Yeah, we have. That's a good question, and we do. We have a very diverse population in our employment, our staff rather. So we have folks that speak other languages. We have folks that, staff members, EMTs and paramedics that currently staff the ambulances in our municipalities that speak sign language. They're able to communicate with sign language. They speak Spanish, English, Portuguese, Greek, Italian. I'm not too familiar with some of the other languages, but we do have a very diverse population that's employed with us and our staff. Religion
and age, and you really have a very diverse staff. Considering how it's not one of the largest organizations in Massachusetts, yet it's really quite diverse.
No, it is quite diverse, and in fact, in Massachusetts, you only have to be at the age of 18 to become certified as an EMT, and a lot of the prospects that we see for employees are coming out right out of EMT school. So, and we have employees that have been with the company for almost 25 years. That started at that very age. In fact, our director of operations that oversees and is the principal affiliate for Somerville, Danny Randau, who is my direct supervisor, has been with the company for over 35 years. He started when there was only 2 ambulances here. He has a diverse background, and he's been with the company established in maintaining those relationships. But back to your question is, we have anywhere from the ages of 18 to 50 plus that staff either a chair car that deal with persons with disabilities, our emergency medical technicians and paramedics, some of which hold other jobs and have other professions, and this is either a part-time or double full-time profession for them because they're passionate about helping people.
I want to give a little plug to try to recruit some of our Somerville young adults and everyone who might have a chance to come and become it starts off at EMT, right?
Correct, yeah.
Right? The
first stages of is EMT, and then you can take a training program to become a certified paramedic. And we offer those training programs in our in-house training center located in our Malden headquarters. So we have EMT programs that run 3 times a year, and we'd be happy to have, you know, citizens of Somerville or anybody that is interested apply for our program. It's very successful.
I was very pleased to walk with Cataldo at this month's domestic violence vigil, and it was great to walk with one of Cataldo's staff who she was telling me about. She's in the middle of training, and she's doing that through her work, and Cataldo's support is helping her to progress her own career, and I can't remember what she was planning to be. I think she was planning to be a dispatcher. I think that's another training that she's taking, and then on to become a paramedic. tech, I think, is how she was going.
Yeah, we have a lot of different, so in EMS there's so many different roles and titles that you can have. It can be field personnel or communications. And one of the things I neglected to mention as part of Cataldo is we have so many different areas that make the company operate on a daily basis that it's kind of hard to remember them all at a given time, because without them, you know, it's like getting a flat tire on a vehicle if they're not in place. And we have so many things in place that make the operations run smoothly daily, and one of them is our dispatch communication center. As far as languages and diversity goes, she may have been training to go work in our secondary PSAP, which is a primary service answering point. We're the second largest emergency medical services answering point for 911 calls that come in, and we provide pre-arrival instructions for people that are suffering a medical emergency or an injury prior to the ambulance and fire or first responders getting dispatched to the scene. So they're the first true life link to that person in need.
Right.
And as far as languages go, we have access 24/7 to the language line, which covers over 200 languages that are spoken. And it is a service that we get, but we link in as a third party, and we get and interpret and try to solicit and interrogate the caller to determine what type of services this person needs,
right,
and what we can do to help them best.
Very powerful. So, note to the community: if you're interested, definitely think of becoming an EMT and looking into the to this fabulous service. So that was my break. Now back to talking about some of the specific services that you and I have had a long history with. So we've been working with Cataldo as an anchor partner with the anti-violence task force team. And so we're working on helping to create a multicultural competency for all of our first responders. And I venture to guess that we're the leading team for Massachusetts, if not the country, in making sure that we all are highly prepared to serve everyone.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that both of us are passionate, especially the Office of Commissions in Somerville. I think it's been just about 2 years you and I have been working together collaboratively within our group in different disciplines within the city government to make sure that there's closed lines of communication, we are ensuring that the goals that we have are executed, and I'm transferring back that information to my senior leadership, my supervisors, and getting it out to the field staff of the importance of domestic violence, multicultural awareness, and violence in general that's been plaguing our communities, and things that we see firsthand as EMTs and paramedics that we're responding to with the police, with the fire department, and we're working on establishing and identifying these trends and how we can do to minimize them. And I think the multicultural awareness, the domestic violence awareness, things that we've been working on have been a good objective of ours and a mission to bring to fruition that we need to have more tailored training and identify critical aspects of these trends of abuse, neglect that people in the city and the community are facing. And us as a first responder and EMS agency are rolling that training out aggressively to make sure that our staff are fully prepared how to advocate for patients that are in need in a crisis or a routine situation.
I think that's even, to be even more clear with Cataldo, I think you guys are helping to lead the charge and are part of making sure that we can, as a group, hold all of our community accountable to be multiculturally competent.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what, it's not only are you guys like receiving it and doing it, it's like, I think you guys are already leading the way and making sure that the people are prepared to be as open, to be a good service to a patient, right? And
Absolutely.
I mean, whether the patient or family member, transgender, Muslim, or just deaf, or whatever their background is to be open to providing the best service to them.
Right, and it should be an equal service. And I think that we had such a powerful showing at our domestic violence vigil. We had city government officials, state government officials there to support us. And what we're pioneering, as you just mentioned, is the communication piece. and the education piece, and the fact that it's something that's very passionate to us to ensure that we're getting folks the service that they need. Because as I mentioned, domestic violence doesn't discriminate at all. Neither does violence. It doesn't, it affects all, black, white, GLBT community, transgender, the Muslim community, and all the different varieties of wonderful cultures that live in this city.
Economic, it doesn't matter. You could be as wealthy as McScrooge.
Of course, absolutely.
It's not about what neighborhood you're from.
And I think what people don't realize, and sometimes it's not that there's a lack of knowledge or ignorance, is that the manicured lawns, the beautiful house, the nice cars, the fancy clothes, people don't know what goes on in someone's home on any given day, or what personality or person they're walking into. And even though on the outside of their home everything may look well, on the inside we don't know what they're dealing with. And then there's that occasion that we're introduced to the most intimate part of someone's life. We're entering their kitchen, their bedroom. They're sick. They're calling us. They're entrusting us as professional EMS medical providers to help them. So we really need to be aware and on the up and up of how to respond and be sensitive to all communities and all walks of life as emergency medical services providers.
And then I think also because you are the first responder, meaning in like before the fire, before the police, right? Or who's first?
That's a good question. So typically how things run, I remember I mentioned to you about the PSAP. Initially, first responders typically would be police and fire going there, and the ambulance gets sent to respond typically within seconds of both fire and police. So depending on what the determinant code is, if it's someone with difficulty breathing or an injury, you name it, anything that would warrant an ambulance, or the reason why someone would need an ambulance, it's the worst day of their life, they need an ambulance.
Right.
We get sent typically in conjunction with police and EMS. But, you know, culturally, police and fire are listed as first responders. EMS is EMS because we're providing the definitive transport and care to the hospital for these patients. So we have a little bit more involvement than the other two agencies. But we work collaboratively together all the time. Right.
I want to kind of talk about, I think a lot of people feel that domestic abuse is about huge violence that lays a person out in massive injury. But I know that we can talk about like stress-induced breathing difficulties or anxieties that are coming, and that may also require an EMS to provide service. So it's like a wide range of service that might be related to sexual assault or domestic violence.
Absolutely. Excuse me. One of the things that you mentioned, a medical condition, an underlying cause that we don't really identify. Domestic violence doesn't always portray violence or an injury. It could be a medical-related illness. It could be something, like you just said, anxiety. It's asking the right questions, choosing your audience, having respect, and yielding to caution when you may need to interview someone privately to get to the bottom of why the ambulance was called, especially when things are inconsistent. Now, our job isn't to take over for the police or another agency and cross job descriptions when it comes to that. Our job is to respond, identify what's wrong with the patient medically or physically, identify if there's mandated reporting involved, such as child abuse, elder abuse, or persons at risk, disabled persons. Those are all things we're mandated to do by law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And Cataldo Ambulance Service, a licensed ambulance company for the Commonwealth, is required to have a strict quality assurance policy on that. And we train our staff that domestic violence just doesn't appear as someone that's abused. It could be emotional abuse, exploitation, sexual assault, and you did mention with children earlier too. Those are an economic status of folks. We really see a lot more though with our lower socioeconomic status patients. They require our service a little bit more, and we identify aspects of abuse or instances of abuse in the home that are either emotional, physical, sexual, and those get reported and documented through Department of Child and Family Services and/or Elder Affairs with Merrimack Valley, because there's so many different parts for our most vulnerable patients, and that's really important to remember. It's kind of like a checks and balances. You have to make sure that you're kind of checking everything and making sure you're covering everything. And our staff that may not be familiar because they're just starting out, we're like, hey, John, can I ask you a question? Why did you ask so many questions? I didn't think to ask that. And then you explain it after, and there's your teachable moment for your staff. Because you can't cover everything in 2 months.
Right, and the 2 months, I mean, a lot of it is being partnered with the senior staff to make sure that they're following.
Absolutely.
What are because you can't learn it all. It's by work.
Absolutely, and that's another thing with our agency. We don't pair an ambulance crew with a junior person. It's a senior member that's been with the company for at least 2 years, who's well-rounded, placed with a junior, less experienced person, and we hope that they blend together, and the junior staff member is mentored by the senior staff member for incidents like I just explained.
Right. So it's classic apprenticeship.
Exactly.
It's really, that's what it is.
Full functionality that, they're qualified to be there, except, those teachable moments and that good partnership, being with someone on the truck and, working with the first responders is a wonderful experience that we try to foster.
So when you talk about like reporting, I know for high risk domestic violence, there's a lot of important keywords in the reporting, so that when your current patient ends up as a complainant in court or is a witness to the prosecution against a defendant, do they use your reports and how things are listed on for the court cases?
Absolutely. Anytime, just like if you were to go to the doctor or the emergency room, an ambulance trip sheet is part of the patient's medical record for pretty much their life. And that could be used in discovery for court for both sides, defense and the plaintiff, or prosecution. Typically, in a case that you mentioned for domestic violence or child abuse or neglect, we use an electronic patient care documentation, so we can actually track trends of abuse or reportable incidents. Now, a reportable incident would be child abuse, elder abuse, persons with disabilities, ADA compliance, etc. What we would do is our compliance, our quality assurance and regulatory affairs director would keep track of how that stuff or how many trends we're seeing in a certain area. It would pique her attention. She doesn't miss much. Yeah. And that's something that would pique her attention and say, hey, we need to pay attention to this certain area because we're seeing a lot more calls and trends with this particular issue, whether it's in Somerville or Everett or Malden, of child abuse, neglect. And we're required to contact DCF and let them know whether or not it's abuse, neglect, if an emergency response is needed by the crisis team to come to the hospital we transported the child to. Physical and objective observations in the home. Was there enough food in the house? Was the child well clothed? Was there heat? Was it sanitary? Was it livable conditions? Those are all things that we scan and look in a patient's home with children, with people at risk, or anybody. Right. But those are things that could get someone in trouble that we're obligated to report. Right. And make sure they get resources.
Get more resources to the family.
Absolutely.
And if at the end of the day a criminal case comes in place because of deliberate neglect and abuse, that ends up in a criminal. But it's also an opportunity to offer resources.
Absolutely, and it's been past practice of Department of Child and Family Services that review these reports. Now everyone says, oh, are you going to file a 51A, or are you going to, that's the term for the child abuse and neglect form. All that form is asking an agency that's impartial to the scene to go back and take a look and say, hey, you know what, there was some findings or objective observations on scene, specifically A, B, and C, that we were asked to come in and take a look. Right. We get a follow-up from that agency, the specific EMT and the company does, and it goes in that file that the findings were sustained, and that's it. And the company, the family or victim alleged is receiving ancillary services from the department. The same with elder affairs. there's Meals on Wheels, they've sent someone for home cleaning, assist someone with activities of daily living, and maybe just someone's in deplorable conditions and they're not getting the care they received because of self-neglect. We talk about adults with disabilities or the elderly folks. Those are our concerned patients where we really need to focus on that may be receiving abuse and neglect and exploitation from family or people that have control of their finances and it's making their living situation suffer.
Right.
And then when we get called, we walk into a complete disaster.
Right.
And it's not a good situation.
Right. And I mean, that's what I think the community is doing, is relying on Cataldo teams to be there and be the community's eyes to make sure people are staying safe.
Absolutely. And our staff is completely dedicated, not just in Somerville, but the EMTs and paramedics, the chair car drivers that we have, they enter people's homes often. It's part of their job. And they identify those things. And the command staff, the field supervisors, shift commanders, get a phone call and saying, hey, we have a really terrible situation. I'd like you either to respond here or consult with you, or we're going to be filing the required relevant report. And at times we've gone over and taken pictures and furnished them to the emergency room to let somebody know how unsafe a certain situation is, or ask the police to respond to assist us. But definitely those trends of identification, though not maximum amounts, there's still enough there to be concerned and to stay on top of.
Right. So when Cataldo is out there and responding to a sexual assault or domestic violence, what are some of the things that you could say is more of a typical response? Is that what would a call be like in some of the typical cases?
Some of the things.
Or is there typical?
For me personally, in my experience as a professional, I've been in EMS for 13 years. I worked 10 years in the city of Boston, and then I transitioned over to Cataldo as a paramedic and worked for many municipalities. And over those years, working in an urban EMS setting, I have seen some horrendous situations of sexual assault, PD sexual assault, child molestation, females that have been held captively by their domestic partner and abused for several hours and freed their home, and the support that you give them, it's almost like sometimes you don't want to leave that patient, but our job is to go in, identify, ask your questions, treat the patient, take them to the hospital, and advocate for them and make sure that they're offered the services that they need. Unfortunately, a lot of things that we see at Cataldo Ambulance Service, as do many other emergency medical services, patients are reluctant to go to the emergency room to be evaluated. So the outcome or the disposition we have is the police call us to evaluate an eye laceration or a bruise or a scratch. We'll get there and the police are dealing with the scene safety part of it and doing the investigation part, and then we get the victim alone. We say, can we ask you a few questions? The injuries don't seem they're inconsistent with the story.
Right. I fell.
I
wasn't with anyone, and then it looks more.
Boxes fell from the cabinet. However, I couldn't help notice there's no boxes on the floor and there's no boxes on the cabinet. I'm not too sure how you got those lumps on your head.
Right. Yeah.
Things like that we work to identify. And as far as pediatric sexual assaults, we call adult trauma X, or PDX is the professional terminology we use. We do our best. And we have protocols in place through the Commonwealth, through the company, that our staff are well trained and versed on how to get patients resources that they need as far as managing and taking care of those victims.
So what I've been hearing a couple times is that Cataldo's there as an advocate for the patient, and you're in there and you're doing assessments, but you're on the side of the patient.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. We try to do our best with what we can for the patient and make sure that they receive ancillary services. If it results in a refusal, that's the right of a patient if they refuse to decline medical treatment against medical advice. We hope that the agency, whether it's Somerville or another municipality, has an advocate that follows up with them, or from the police department. And that's not something that we typically do. But if we do transport the patient, we do offer them the services of the surrounding community hospitals and from from our agency the best we can.
Right. So it's just want to make sure that people are getting that Cataldo is not, and the staff, the EMTs and paramedics are not there as bully polices, or they're not there to do anything other than to make sure that people can walk away and start building something safe in their lives.
Yeah, the Cataldo EMTs and paramedics aren't just ambulance drivers. We're professional medical providers that are there to listen, to care for you, to take you to the hospital, and to provide you resources that we need. Our supervisors are trained with how to, get crews ancillary information if they need it, and also we have very good relationships with the hospitals that we transport our patients to, that the staff over the years of their employment here have relationships with, that get these patients services, social services or other things that they need that are very important to that specific situation.
Yeah, I think that people need to feel safe in calling, asking for help, and taking the advice of the experts, because it's not like you guys stepped in the scene and normally you're just Band-Aid folks and you haven't ever seen some of this before. So we're giving you advice based on a lot of information that we have up until we first met you, and we really strongly urge you to take the next step.
Right. And just like anything else, it's confidential and we can't force anybody, but we are a service that's there to help, and we want the public and the community to know that we are involved, and when we have to respond to an incidence of domestic violence, sexual assault, no matter if it's multicultural or routine, everyone is treated the same. We're there to help and advocate and provide the best resources that we can to help any given person.
So I just think that that's one of the biggest messages that you and I wanted to make sure that everybody got, is that Cataldo is a leader in our community, helping to forge what we think is something that other communities aren't doing, which is creating that multicultural competency for preparedness before and after an incident, so that everybody on the team, everybody in the community is able to serve to their utmost best.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I just wanted to tell you thank you very much for...
Oh, thank you for having me and letting me personally explain what a Cataldo Ambulance Service mission is and what we're doing to work together to help the community. It means a lot to us. Yeah,
I think that it's a great blessing in Somerville to have Cataldo there. They were great, and a huge presence at this year's domestic violence vigil to raise awareness about domestic violence. Thanks in a large part to John himself leading the charge. So that's amazing. And yes, so we're continuing to work on building a multiculturally competent community. We do that through the professionals that are out in our community with Cataldo, with the police and fire and the Respond domestic violence shelter, and through the Office of Commissions, the City of Somerville. So
absolutely,
we're working on it.
We are, and if anyone's interested, if it's okay, if you please visit our